welcome everyone. My name is Ariana Estoque. I'm the Director of Member Experience at Congregation Emanu-El. It is my pleasure to welcome you all here this evening to celebrate 50 years of women in the Rabbinate. Yes, I'm a Temple employee, and yes, I'm a third generation Emanu-El member, but tonight I'm simply here as a fangirl. Growing up at Emanu-El, my entire Jewish experience has included female clergy leadership. I feel very lucky to be able to say that and that my children can say that. The women rabbis you see before you have shaped who I am. They've led me through every life cycle event, every pivotal Jewish moment, every simcha and every sorrow. They are women who I admire, who I look to for advice, women who I see as intelligent, strong, grounded, funny, and rational, particularly when I am feeling or being irrational. Every woman you will hear from this evening is an Eshet Chayil, a woman of valor. This term comes from chapter 31 of the book of Proverbs. The text tells us, this woman opens her mouth with wisdom. She is a woman whose children stand and rejoice in her, and who is clothed in strength and splendor and laughs until her last day. As Sarah Esther Christ writes, an Eshet Chayil knows how to care for others while caring for herself. These women are amazing leaders. They are amazing mothers. They have shown me and our congregation how to balance family, work, and community. They are spiritual leaders and our guides, and they have all become part of our own family. It is with true pride and honor for me to introduce this program. To kick off this special evening and to get our festivities started, please welcome Senior Rabbi Beth Singer.
Thank you so much, Ariana. I'm a little verklempt. That was so beautiful, so beautiful, and we deeply appreciate our partnership with you and all of our staff at Congregation Emanu-El, and a special shout out to Rabbi Jonathan Singer. He conceived of this program tonight and then said, well, I shouldn't be involved in this. So here we are, and it really is a time of great celebration. And I just want to take a moment before we start with questions and introducing ourselves about what is it we're celebrating. And we start by remembering that we are celebrating Rabbi Regina Yonis, who in 1935 became the first woman we know of ordained as a rabbi. Rabbi Yonis perished in Auschwitz, but she was the first, and she served her community. We celebrate with tremendous joy and emotion Rabbi Sally Priesand, who I think does like 5 of these a night, but we were extremely lucky to get her on our panel. And next week at our national conference, we'll be doing a great celebration of Rabbi Priesand, the first female rabbi in America, ordained in 1972. We celebrate the many female clergy who have served this congregation. Rabbi Mickey Bourne was the first woman rabbi to serve at Congregation Emanu-El, and we celebrate her. And I might not have everybody, but Rabbi Gail Pomerantz, Cantor Roz Barrick, Cantor Marcia Addy, our own Rabbi Sarah Paris, who is currently on parental leave, but she is a vital part. And as far as I'm here, there's a little box with Rabbi Paris in it, and each of our panelists tonight. So we're thrilled that you're joining us. And we are going to go around briefly and just introduce ourselves. I'm Rabbi Beth Singer, Senior Rabbi of Congregation Emanu-El, and I've been here since I was ordained in 1989, and I've been at this congregation since 2013. Rabbi Priesand?
Thank you, and thank you so much for welcoming me to the Congregation Emanu-El family tonight. In 1981, I became rabbi of Monmouth Reformed Temple in Tinton Falls, New Jersey, where I served for 25 years, becoming Rabbi Emerita upon my retirement in 2006.
And Rabbi Cohn?
So I'm Rabbi Helen Cohn. I was ordained in 1994 and came immediately after to Temple Emanu-El and served there until 2006. And I moved to Tucson, Arizona, where I still live, and became part of a new congregation, the startup congregation, Makor Chaim, in 2008. And I still serve that congregation now.
I'm Rabbi Carla Fenves. I was ordained in 2011 and came straight to Emanu-El and served for 9 years until 2020. And I am Zooming from Army housing in West Point at the U.S. Military Academy, where we've been for the last year and a half. And oh, it's so special for me to see all the names. And yeah, just I miss you all a lot.
Hi, I'm Rabbi Sydney Mintz, and we do miss you a lot, Rabbi Fendes. We do miss you a lot, Rabbi Cohn. And I'm the rabbi here who has served with all the other women rabbis on this panel, which is just such an amazing. I also have goosebumps a little bit right now. And what an incredible thing to hear from Ariana, who all these women rabbis lifted up and raised up to be such a phenomenal Jewish educator and an Eshet Chayil herself. So we appreciate that, Ariana. And I've been at, it's an interesting time in the world. And it's a time, as we have to remember, that it is still Purim here on the West Coast. The sun has not yet set. So it's a time of simcha and joy, simultaneously a time of great darkness in the world, the way it usually is. But I wanted to also mention that this Shabbat is the 100th anniversary of Judith Kaplan's bat mitzvah. So we have 100 years of girls becoming bat mitzvah. We have 50 years of women in the rabbinate, and you've had 25 years of Rabbi Sydney Mintz. So I've been at Temple Emanu-El for 25 years. I like how it fits in there. And it's really a thrill for all of us to be here. And we are looking forward to speaking with all the rabbis. And one of the things that I will speak on behalf of all rabbis that we hate the most that people do is a question I'm going to ask Sally Priesand right now to start off, which is, Rabbi Sally Priesand, do you remember the first time we met?
I'm sorry, but I don't.
Oh, well, I guess I wasn't that memorable, but you were. And I just want to start out by saying it is still an honor to be here with you and to have you and to celebrate you and what you have given to the Jewish community and to the American Reform community. And we're going to keep celebrating you. And I will tell you that I met you when I was 16 years old, and I was on a bus at what was formerly known as the UAHC, the Union of American Hebrew Congregations, at a biennial in Houston, Texas. It's now the URJ, and we still have biennials. And at this particular time, I got lost from my NIFTY group, and I got separated, and I got onto one of the shuttle buses that was going from the conference center to Temple Emanu-El in Houston. And I was a little bit nervous, and I got on, and there were all these men sitting around me, and I turned to the woman sitting next to me. My heart was pounding. And her name tag said, Rabbi Sally Priesand. It was one of the most impactful moments of my young adult female life. Just to sit next to you.
It reminds me of something Albert Einstein used to say. Coincidence is God's way of being anonymous.
I love that. So just to be in your presence now, a couple years later, after I was 16 years old, and to have had that experience, and as we all know, to have that, I mean, for me at 16 years old, and to have you in my life in that way, and I couldn't even introduce myself. I was so overwhelmed. But I will never forget that bus ride and that shuttle ride. And I thought, anything and everything is possible because of you. And so for generations now, since 1972, we have stood on your shoulders, and we continue to. And what I want to ask each one of us now is a question that was sent to me and that most people ask. Why did you become a rabbi? Who inspired you to do this? And since you were there in 1972, Rabbi Priesand, I'm going to ask you to start us off on your journey.
Happy to do that. I decided I wanted to be a rabbi when I was 16 years old. Unfortunately, I don't remember why. I remember thinking I wanted to be a teacher, and whatever my favorite subject was, I was going to teach. So one year I was going to be an English teacher, and one year a French teacher, and then a math teacher. And in the end, I decided to be a teacher of Judaism, which is what a rabbi really is. And fortunately for me, my parents gave me what I consider to be one of the greatest gifts that a parent could give a child, and that is the courage to dare and to dream. And because of that, I was able to remain focused on my goal, unconcerned that no woman had ever been ordained rabbi in America, and really just not paying too much attention to the doubts I heard expressed in the Jewish community. So I think I'm going to stop there and hear from our other colleagues.
So I'm going to start in reverse order with Rabbi Carla Fenves.
I was so lucky. I grew up with a lot of female rabbis. I had a lot of different role models. Debbie Robbins was the rabbi of my home congregation in Dallas, Texas. She did my bat mitzvah. And she remembers this. I don't, that at the end of my bat mitzvah, she said to me, "You should be a rabbi." And I kind of laughed and didn't engage with her. I grew up in a pretty formal congregation that was pretty classically reform, and I just didn't see myself up there. But I really loved her, and I really connected with her throughout my life. She did my wedding. She was there when I was ordained. When I went to college at Stanford, my freshman year, I met Patricia Carlin Newman and Noah Kushner, Michael Copeland, Janet Martyr, all of these amazing female rabbis in the Bay Area. And they just seemed like the coolest people. They seemed really intellectual, but also spiritual. They seemed really joyous in what they were doing in their life. And they really took time for me. I mean, I just like cold called two of them and asked if we could go on walks. And in retrospect, it's amazing how patient and encouraging they were. And at different moments throughout college, each of them kind of pulled me aside and said, "You should really think about being a rabbi." And I started to listen more and think about who am I gravitating towards the most, who inspires me the most. That by junior year of college, I was really excited. I visited Hebrew Union College and applied.
I'm going to turn to Rabbi Helen Cohn.
Carla, I'm glad you mentioned that because you remind me of the first time someone said that to me, and I was so stunned. It had never occurred to me. The first person who said it was a friend of mine, someone I worked with, a man who wasn't Jewish, who sort of picked up the vibe about how engaged I was with Jewish learning. And I remember the moment when he said, "You want to be a rabbi?" And I thought, "You have no idea what you're talking about. You're Catholic. What do you know?" So what planted the seed was when I was in my sort of early 40s and I went to a Rosh Hashanah evening service. I was on a business trip, and it turned out it was Rosh Hashanah evening, and just on a lark, are you having services tonight? Which is, of course, a joke. It was Rosh Hashanah evening. And that whole service like transformed my life. But the relevant piece was I was sitting there in a VFW hall with 100 other people. I knew no one. I was somewhere in New Hampshire. And the rabbi walked out. So this was about 1983. And it was a woman. And I thought, oh, right, they're ordaining women now. And then she introduced the cantor, and the cantor walked out, and the cantor was a woman also. And that's what got me, because I didn't, I still had that old sort of stereotype about cantors. So then 5 years later, and I'm completely now turned on to Jewish learning. I want to know more. I want to learn Hebrew. And this is 86, 87, 88. I was living in St. Louis at the time. And I called Washington University and I said, do you have any courses in Hebrew? And I got this guy on the phone who sounded like he was from the shtetl. What do you want? Why do you want to learn Hebrew? And he was so discouraging that I thought, I have to go to HUC. There's no other place. At that time, there were not Jewish studies programs the way they are now. And I didn't know any other way to learn in the depth that I wanted to learn except to go to HUC. So that's why I went. It really wasn't to be a rabbi. That was sort of like, oh, now I'm a rabbi. What do I do now? But the 5 years at HUC were really what I was after. I'll stop there.
Thank you, Rabbi Cohn. And now Rabbi Beth Singer.
I grew up in a very small town in Southern California, very few Jews in that town. And my parents were very, very traditional. So I wouldn't have learned about this at all, but they were all in our synagogue. They were deeply involved leaders of our synagogue, went every Friday night, lots of Saturday mornings. And my grandparents were members of the Stephen Wise Free Synagogue in New York City. I had my bat mitzvah in 1973, and I found out that their rabbi was Rabbi Sally Priesand. So that was just this amazing connection. I didn't meet Sally until many years later after I was ordained, but I certainly heard about you, Sally. And, I had the epiphany at my bat mitzvah, at the very end of my bat mitzvah, that I loved what I'd created my own. It was 1973. I created the service myself. There was probably a little Cat Stevens in there. And I wanted to do this. And some of the earliest, I was thinking about what Rabbi Fenves said. It's so funny. I also met Rabbi Patty Carlin Newman very early on, and she was a great influence. In college, I met Rabbi Laura Geller, who was a Hillel rabbi in LA at that time. She was a huge influence, and even more so, Rabbi Kinneret Shir-Yon, who moved to Israel and started a great congregation in Israel. And those were my early influences.
Thank you so much, Rabbi Beth. And before I go on to another question, I wanted to just share a short story. And I will say that almost all of my influential rabbis were men. All the rabbis that I grew up with were men in my congregation, and they were amazing. Rabbi Herbert Bronstein, Rabbi Rifat Sonsino, Rabbi Steve Leader was my youth group leader. And so it took me a while. And one of the things I will say is that it was, there was the challenge of applying to rabbinical school in 1991, not as a woman, but at that time I was a lesbian, now I'm queer. So just semantics, but to apply as an out lesbian. So that was something that was just coming into sharp focus for the gay and lesbian community in the early 90s. And I'll talk about that later. But what I will say is that I knew things were shifting when I heard a story about a colleague of ours who was a rabbi, and she was a rabbi in the East Coast, and her cantor was a woman. And a family from their congregation went to LA, and the son, the little boy who was 8 years old, who had grown up with a rabbi and a cantor on the East Coast, were both women. When the rabbi at his cousin's bar mitzvah walked out on the bima, he looked at his mother and he said in all complete seriousness, "Mom, I had no idea that men could become rabbis." So for me, that was such an unbelievable story because it actually is true and wonderfully true. I do want to move now and ask about in terms of generations, and I'm going to start with Rabbi Fenves to tell us, when you think about from your ordination until today, what have been some of the most challenging parts of being a rabbi in your own generation?
I think, from my particular experience, my class had 40 graduated. We started with 40 rabbinical students in Jerusalem, and something like 8 couples got together that year in Israel. So love was in the air in the streets of Jerusalem. So almost half my class ended up pairing off. and a lot of people got married. And I think that one of the shared stories has been, like so many of my friends, like how to have a dual career life, given that I don't think it was just grad school. I mean, people meet in law school, medical school, but there was really a shared vision of liberal Judaism that many of us connected over. And so I think one of the challenges I've seen in particular, obviously Rabbi Beth and Rabbi Jonathan, it's not a unique thing to marry someone that you go to rabbinical school with, but my class was particularly um, marked by that. And I think we continue to be as we try to balance kind of our vision for liberal Judaism and the Jewish people, and how we also are good spouses. If we, chose and we're fortunate enough to have kids, how we be good parents, and balancing those things. I think maybe because some of the barriers were already knocked down, my class was the first class to have an equal number of women and men as well, or female identified and male identified students. The next barrier was kind of around how do we do this within a family? And what does that look like for our long-term, for our long-term service to the Jewish people?
Thank you so much, Rabbi Fenves. I'm going to have Rabbi Beth and then Rabbi Cohn and then Rabbi Priesand.
Yeah, and certainly what Rabbi Fenves just said about the challenge of work-life balance, and even in my generation, having children. Someone in my first synagogue, when I was pregnant with my second child, said she's going to do 2 children in one contract. So, the remarks were out there, and I know, my husband would walk into his office and say, "Oh, I got to take Jenny to the doctor." And they say, "What a good dad." And I just didn't even say if I was doing something with my kids in the middle of the workday. I'd say, I'll be back in an hour, I promise. And it was just a different time. And it wasn't so valued women would be really suspect to want to take care of our children while serving our congregations. But for me, even more so, I mentioned that I grew up in this small town, very few Jewish people. My parents were particularly conservative in every possible way. And I was born in 1960, and they raised me and my sisters to be good little girls who would always, be very kind and friendly and non-confrontational, and to grow up to really get along with everybody. And of course, it's a very good skill as a rabbi to get along with everyone. But it was, I think that girls and boys are raised differently today. And I'm glad about that. And I know that our children were raised with a greater sense of self, to be able to stand up and use your voice, and have to have a good disagreement sometimes. And so I'd say for my generation, for many women like myself who were born in the 1960s, being raised with girly expectations, and then thrown into a profession where sometimes you really have to stand up, and you have to stand up and talk to, your board or whomever it is. That was a challenge that I've had to really grow into.
Thank you, Rabbi Beth. Rabbi Helen Cohn.
I can relate to that. I just want to say, Beth, I can relate to that. I think it is not a unique issue for you, but something I think that many women rabbis have to work with. So from my generation's point of view, I graduated from high school in 1961. So, and from a Reformed congregation, girls were not really becoming bat mitzvah then. And so for me, the ongoing issue from the beginning, when I went to HUC, I hardly knew any Hebrew. And that has been like the biggest challenge, that I didn't start learning Hebrew when I was 20 or 25 years or even 30 years younger. The other thing was when I was in Jerusalem, especially, Carla, you can relate to this. Most of the students were in their 20s, and I was in my mid 40s. And there was really a generation gap, which continued when I was in Cincinnati. I really felt, I think, the oldest student, certainly in our class in Jerusalem. Not by a lot, but I had a career. My kids were already in college, so I didn't have that kind of work, home life conflict as much. I mean, there was certainly had family issues, but the other thing was, and again, this is generational, it's also really kind of personal. I'm not a kid person. I never have been particularly. So I so much appreciated coming to Temple Emanu-El. And there was Paris Wolf Priesand, who was like taking care of the kids. And so I could focus on what my passion was, which was working with adults like me who were in midlife, who were hungry for more, who didn't have a really solid Jewish education. You know, if they even became bar mitzvah or went through confirmation, it's really still not the kind of deep adult learning that I had craved and that I have ever since really wanted to provide. And it feels like that's somewhat generational.
Great. Rabbi Priesand.
Well, my experience has been really very different than that of the other panelists. Because I was the first, I was always the first to meet every challenge, and there were plenty of those along the way. And I was very conscious of the fact that people were judging the idea of women in the rabbinate by me and what I did. And for example, if somebody came to services and I preached a sermon that wasn't the most brilliant, they may have left saying, we don't need a woman rabbi. So for many years, the decisions that I made in terms of my life were what's best for women in the rabbinate, not necessarily what's best for me. And my very first rule is know yourself and be yourself. When I was in rabbinic school, I always assumed that I would marry and have children. And when I was interviewed, I used to say, well, in my congregation, there will be a nursery in my synagogue next to my study. But once I began serving God and the Jewish people, I discovered that I would really not be able to do both and do them well, just who I am. And so I chose my career over a family. And I stand in awe of people who can do both and do them well, but I know that I'm not one of them. And I've never really regretted it because I understand that every person whose life I touch has become part of my extended family. And when I went to Berlin a few years ago to walk in the footsteps of Regina Jonas, I discovered that she too believed that a woman should not get married and have children if she was a rabbi. So that kind of shook me up a little to discover that and a lot of other things were very similar between her life and my life.
Thank you. Can I ask you, Rabbi Sally Priesand, what is it that you're most proud of when you consider this, that when, you said you have been the first of everything, and then you think of, there is not a woman rabbi in this country who would say, Rabbi Sally Priesand, I don't know who that is. Like, you are universal. It's like if somebody said, who's Rabbi Sally Priesand, I'd say, well, who are you? Where were you ordained? But when I want to ask you, because you must have, and it's difficult for women. It's difficult for many women to brag and to talk about themselves. Just it's hard for many women to do that. Give yourself a moment. What are some of the things that you're the most proud of since you were there at the very beginning? Some of the first that you could share that strike a chord of pride for you in a good way.
Well, of course, the first thing that I'm most proud of and that I believe will be my legacy is that I opened new doors for women in the Jewish community. And not only that, but I have spent my entire career trying to hold open those doors. And reflecting now on the past, I would like to think that opening doors for women opened the doors. It was the beginning of opening the doors for a lot of other people as well. And whether it's today, you know, when I was ordained, most people just thought we had two sexes, male and female. But today we know there are many others. And whether it's transgender or non-binary or LGBTQ, whatever, I think that we have gone a long way. We still have a ways to go to making the Jewish community both equal and inclusive. And I would like to think that my ordination started that process. I really think that is the thing that I will be most remembered for. I went to HUC because I wanted to be a congregational rabbi. And coming to Monmouth Reformed Temple in 1981 enabled me to fulfill that dream. And one of the things I appreciated most is that the congregation thought of me not as the first woman rabbi, but as their rabbi. And I think that kept me very grounded. I also am very proud of the fact that working with my congregation, which we consider to be a temple family, I was able to bring a Jewish presence to our community. And that's something that continues to this day. In fact, our local Jewish Heritage Museum just the other day opened an exhibit about the gifts that I have given to Monmouth County. Very different than how people celebrate this anniversary on a more national or international level. But this was an opportunity to celebrate it in my community, and that made it really very special.
Thank you. And we continue with the celebrations, which are all fabulous and well-deserved. Before I move on, you know, each one of us has taken it upon ourselves. It's a very, very serious career choice. I know that none of us took it lightly when we made the choice to enter the rabbinate, whether it was when you were very young in rabbinical school or a second career. But before I move on, I want to ask you a question, and I'll start with you, Rabbi Priesand. Could you imagine being something else? Did you have aspirations at all when you were younger of being something else besides a rabbi, and what was that?
No, really only to be a teacher. And it led me straight to Judaism. And I will tell you that when I first applied to the college, they tried to steer me toward religious education. There are 5 letters back and forth that you can see in the book, The Sacred Calling, 4 Decades of Women in the Rabbinate. The letters are there, and they were a little taken aback when I first applied and wrote a letter and made it quite clear that I was interested in the rabbinate. And so it took a little bit of time for them to decide, who was supposed to make that decision if a woman could be a rabbi. One of the things we celebrate this year is the 100th anniversary of the Central Conference of American Rabbis, the CCAR, deciding actually that women could be rabbis or they could not be denied ordination. It took 50 years until my ordination. One of the reasons why I think I was ordained when I was ordained is because of the support of Dr. Nelson Glick, the president of the College Institute at that time. And he wanted to ordain a woman. He took care of a lot of little problems in the background that I probably never even heard about. Unfortunately, he died the year before I was ordained. And his wife, Helen, who was a distinguished physician and researcher in Cincinnati, told me that before he died, he said there were 3 things he wanted to live to do. And one of them was to ordain me. And so that has been a great deal to me. And he is the one whose vision and commitment laid the foundation for the ordination of women. He, as the president of the College Institute, decided they were going to do it, and the CCAR and the URJ had nothing to do with it. That's the history behind the ordination of women.
That is fabulously fascinating. 100 years. It took 50 years.
Yes, it did.
I mean, I know a lot because I'm a rabbi. I didn't know that. I did not know that it took 50 years. And then you think, wait, but it only took 50 years. And I love that. I've had people ask me, how long have women been rabbis? And I say, well, a really long time, like, way more than half my lifetime. And I remember somebody say well, what, 30, 40 years? And I go, yeah, a long time. And they said, but isn't your history like 4,000 years old? It's a brief moment. But when I think about the next 4,000 years, it's going to be much better now that the past 50 have happened. So I'm going to ask Rabbi Fenves and then Rabbi Cohn and Rabbi Beth to answer two questions, which is the follow-up from Rabbi Priesand. And when you were a little girl, could you imagine, or did you have a passion for being something else? And I will say that because I wasn't sure if I was a little girl or a little boy when I was growing up, I wanted to be one of two things, and you guys could always imagine what they would be. Either I wanted to be Mark Spitz, I wanted to be an Olympic swimmer, or a stand-up comic. So it was kind of like if Jerry Seinfeld and Mark Spitz got together, that's who I wanted to be and know the Torah. So it kind of worked out for me. Rabbi Fenves?
My great-grandfather was a pharmacist. He wanted to be a doctor, but as a Jewish man in Budapest, that's who I'm named after, Karl. He became a pharmacist instead. And my grandfather was an internist, and my dad is an internist. So I had like a little bear doctor on my shelf when I was little. It just turns out I'm not very good at chemistry or really any science class. So that wasn't meant to be. But my dad, when I broke the news that I was going to rabbinical school, I kind of waited to tell him last. I think he still thought medical school was happening. He said, Maimonides was a rabbi and a doctor. So after rabbinical school, you can always go to medical school. And when I left Emanu-El a year and a half ago, my dad texted me, you could always apply to medical school. There is always the door is always open. But that really, the doctor was what I wanted to be as a little girl.
Okay, Rabbi Cohn.
So this is a generational thing too. And I didn't want to be something. I was going with the flow. After I graduated from college, I got married, kind of went with the flow. And yet I always knew when I was in my mid-20s that I was going to change my life somehow in my mid-40s. I didn't know how, but I just had a sense of it. I guess it had to do with when my kids would be older or out of the house. And so one of the ways that in a small way I'm a pioneer, I guess, is that I am a second career rabbi. And when I met with Rabbi Gary Zola to just talk, is it possible that I could apply to HUC? My question was not because I'm a woman, because I knew that women were being ordained. The question was, am I too old? Now in both Jewish and Christian, liberal Christian circles, it's quite common for people to go back to seminary or to go to seminary as a second career. But at the time, it was really not so common. And in fact, I was 45 when I applied to HUC, or when I started. The other piece of what I always sort of thought I might do was to be a writer. So my thought was, when I'm in my mid-40s, I will become a writer. I will, write novels. And as it's turned out, I write every week I write a Torah commentary to the congregation every week. I've been doing it for 13 years. So however many 13 times 52 is, I'm writing every week and really quite loving it. So sometimes what we think we're going to be turns out to be like on a part of it, but not quite what we thought in the first place.
Fabulous. Rabbi Beth Singer.
There we go. Well, I just have to say first that Sally, I've heard you tell that story about Nelson Glick before, and it just moves me so deeply every time. And it reminds us that any person can inspire other people to become what they want to become. So I'm so glad that he had that foresight. It's, we have to think back to that time that he had those thoughts and those ambitions for you in that time. And it's really stunning. He was thinking forward. And I'll just, I decided when I was 13 that I wanted to be a rabbi, but was always very embarrassed to tell people that I already knew when I was 13 years old, what I wanted to be when I grew up. And in 12th grade, toward the end of 12th grade, they had one of those things where you could sign up for a career that you could explore for a week. It was a week or two. And I loved animals so much. So I signed up for the veterinarian rotation. And I went and worked in a vet's office for a week thinking, well, maybe I won't be a rabbi. Maybe I'll be a veterinarian. And I remember that I went in and I was standing in the corner and the doctor was just starting to open up the cat. And he just pointed, he goes, she's about to pass out. And then that was the last of my veterinarian career. So there's not a ton of blood involved in the rabbinate, and I'm really grateful for that.
I guess that's a testament that it's easier to work with B'nai Mitzvah students, Bar Mitzvah students, than to dissect a cat. Okay, so sometimes. Rabbi Priesand, since you really have been here for every single generation of women who have been ordained over the last 50 years, what would you think of to impart? What is some wisdom you would like to impart to the rabbis of the future? Because you're looking at this expanse, and so many of us having, the ordination from 1972, and now it's 2022. When you're looking at the future, what would you advise, or what kind of wisdom would you share for a young woman today who might even be just a teenager and say, I wonder if this is for me? What would you impart to her? Because I have to tell you, I think there's a few of them on this Zoom right now.
Okay, well, I probably would say first that remind them that they can be whatever they want to be, and then suggest that they be involved in synagogue life. I happen to believe that the synagogue is the only institution that makes Jews Jewish. And with all the challenges we face today, I'm not really concerned about the survival of the Jewish people, but I'm way more concerned about the survival of Judaism itself. So I feel that one has to learn everything they can about our tradition so we can make our own unique contribution to the survival of the Jewish people and Judaism itself. Now, I have 5 rules. I already told you about know yourself and be yourself. I guarantee you that when I was ordained, everybody thought they knew how the first woman rabbi should be, act, dress, look, whatever. And if you've ever seen any pictures of me back in 1972, you know that I had very long hair down to my waist and that I had very, very short skirts, mini skirts. That was how women dressed then. So I just decided then and there to be myself, and it has stood me well over my career. Next, don't worry. We all have moments when worry inhibits our ability to do what we want to do. And for that, I sort of developed my worry rule, which is sit down every day and worry for 10 minutes, as much as you want, and then get up and accept the opportunities for growth and for good that each new day brings, and make the most of it. And there'll be another 10 minutes tomorrow to worry again. Always try your best. success is good. A lot of people allow failure to inhibit them. My belief is that failure, you can still learn from failure itself. Never daring to fail is the real failure. Success is good, but if you want to develop and move forward, then remember that if you always try your best and you learn from your mistakes, then there's nothing wrong with failure. And the world moves forward every day because someone is willing to take the risk. Next, live with humility. Humility doesn't mean denying your achievements, but to me, it means remembering that God gives you the power to create, and a lot of other people have stood with you along the way. To me, humility is a forgotten virtue in our day and age. And finally, maintain your sense of humor. Laughter has many healing properties, and in the end, laughter makes the world a more pleasant place for everyone. So those are my 5 rules.
Thank you. We need you to write them down and then send them to us, because that's a lot. And I love that you ended with humor, because, and I'm sure you've heard this, rabbis, about the rabbi and the cantor and the president of the synagogue. It might be our synagogue, it might be another synagogue, who were standing in front of the open ark on Yom Kippur, and the rabbi bows down in front of the open ark and says, "I'm nobody, I'm no one, I'm nothing." And the cantor looks at the rabbi and bows down onto the ground and says, "I'm no one, Elohim Adonai, I'm nobody, I'm nobody, I'm nobody." And the president of the synagogue looks at the rabbi and the cantor and looks at the two of them on the ground and gets on the ground. And the president says, "I'm nobody, I'm no one." And the rabbi whispers to the cantor, "Look who thinks she's nobody." So I hear the boisterous laughter all over the Bay Area. And I want to take a moment. That wasn't our synagogue, by the way. But I want to ask a specific question about being an Emanu-El rabbi for our 3 Emanu-El rabbis. And one of you is still an Emanu-El rabbi, Rabbi Beth Singer. So this is in the hot seat, in the seat. But I'll start with Carla Fenves, or Rabbi Carla Fenves, and then I'm going to go to Rabbi Helen Cohn and then Rabbi Beth Singer. Can you share with us, now that you've been in the Jewish world outside of San Francisco, something particular and unique to being an Emanu-El rabbi?
I think a huge part of it is the combination of this deep rootedness in history with a very progressive, dynamic urban community. That I think the contrast of the two, working together with such a large clergy team, is really special. And I also feel like so many of the large clergy teams in the country go for kind of homogeneity. And Emanu-El has always wanted diversity, wanted different voices, encouraged the rabbis not actually purposely to be really different from each other and to openly dialogue with each other. So those are the 2 things that really strike me as special and things that I really benefited from. I also feel so fortunate that for me, I had all these rabbis, female and otherwise, who had already laid the groundwork for a lot of just, I think, positivity around my ability to be pregnant on the Bima, my ability to join the CCAR, to travel to Israel, to have real, all these different things in my professional life. I feel like there was a footprint and already a sense of we care about our rabbis and we want to take care of them and let them kind of find their own voice as they evolve.
Carla, I absolutely ditto what you said. Totally. That was my experience too. So I would say that when Rabbi Pierce hired me in that Sydney, that was a year or two before your time, he deliberately hired someone who to have gender diversity. I think that was important to him. And also, I think he was happy to have someone who had some life experience, so that it was assumed from day one that I would create whatever I wanted to create at the congregation. There was nothing laid out for me beforehand. Now, I did already say that the whole religious school area was taken care of, and I just followed my own interests. I'm in a very small congregation now, so I now know about getting there early and setting up the chairs, and staying until everyone else is left and locking up. So I have been always grateful to the maintenance staff at Congregation Emanu-El, who support the rabbis in so many ways that congregants actually don't know. The whole team thing, I agree with you, Carla, about that. I said, I think I'd like to lead a trip to New York and I called it take a bite out of the big Jewish apple. Like, okay, fine, Rabbi Cohn, go for it. Like, if there was anything that I felt that might be, useful to the congregation and interesting. Someone in the chat, I think it was Terry Krause, mentioned the SITE program, the Spirituality Institute of Temple Emanu-El, which grew out of my participation in IJS, the Institute for Jewish Spirituality. But before that, I said, let's have a serious Jewish learning opportunity. And we created the Jewish Knowledge College, which I know some of you who are on this call participated in. It's a 3-year, 6-semester serious Jewish learning taught by all the clergy. And as a bonus, that's where I met my husband, Dennis.
Mhm.
And really a very strong ditto to what Carla said, the historical nature of this synagogue and the fact that you can go into any service and say hello to a 6th generation San Francisco and someone who just moved to San Francisco this past month. And I'll only add to, and the strong collaborative clergy team, I'll only add to all of that, I really love the synagogue's connection to the city, to the interfaith community, and to the issues that are happening in San Francisco. We're very deeply involved with the mayor's office, and it's a real civically engaged congregation. Right now, the congregation is working very hard to figure out how we respond to the events going on in Ukraine, and how we talk about Israel and talk about the Palestinians. So these are some of the ways that I think that Emanu-El is really unique. And there's a cry and a hue from the chat, Rabbi Mintz, for you to also respond to this question.
I'm not saying in a crying, but I will. I'll add my 2 cents by saying that for me, coming to Emanu-El in 1997. What used to be called the Jewish Bulletin, and now is the J, did an interview with me. And I said, I'll tell you anything you want to know, but just don't focus on the whole lesbian thing. Oh, don't worry, it has nothing to do with the article. And then that Friday, the article came out. Temple Emanu-El's new role model, lesbian, rabbi, Jew, woman. Lesbian, rabbi, Jew, woman. I was like, that is journalism. So that was a big deal, and then it became not a big deal after a while. And it, in very San Francisco fashion, I think one of the worries for some people was, like, they're going to hire a lesbian rabbi, the floodgates are going to open, and everybody from Shahar Zahav is going to come over to Temple Emanu-El, which didn't happen. Shahar Zahav is going strong, but I do think it changed the way that people saw Emanu-El. In terms of feeling more at home there. And I would say what was also very unique was the opportunity. I share what you said, Helen and Carla, and that Rabbi Pierce and then Rabbi Beth and Rabbi Jonathan have been such open colleagues in terms of that's your strength, pick it up and go for it, and advocating to the board and saying, you know what, you think that young adults don't have a place in the San Francisco Jewish community? Well, create something, call it whatever you want. And I said, well, is it okay if they don't pay membership dues? And they said, fine, do whatever you want. Now, 22 years later, they're paying membership dues. And I think that the late Shabbat and having the opportunity to engage young adult Jews in San Francisco who didn't have a place 22 years ago and still after or wherever we are in this pandemic to know that we opened the doors. And again, 250 young adults came back to Temple Emanu-El for Friday nights. That seems very San Francisco to me. And they're all new kids. Now, speaking of kids, I want to welcome somebody. This is kind of like this is the opposite of a Zoom bomb. And I did ask her parents' permission, which I thought, Rabbi Fenves used to be our youngest rabbi when I was there. So you're still young, Rabbi Fenves, but tell us what year you were ordained.
2011.
So 2011 is, in my estimation, at least a decade ago. And I thought to myself, there's some fabulous, amazing young women rabbis who were just ordained in the last year or two. And I thought to myself, I wonder who we could bring on who would say yes. And I have to say, one of the most brilliant and amazing young rising stars in the rabbinate happens to be our own Rabbi Beth and Rabbi Jonathan Singer's daughter, Rabbi Rena Singer, and she said yes to come in. And so I'm so thrilled. This is an unannounced guest, but we have Rabbi Rena Singer. And I will say, Rabbi Rena Singer, you know this, but Rabbi Rena Singer was ordained and became the rabbi at Temple Sholem in Chicago. And I highlight that because I was named 55 years ago on the bima that you now stand on by Rabbi Louis Binstock. And I don't want to blame him for my name. I don't want to blame, my parents, my mother's on the Zoom, but my name is Sarah Rivka. And I have always wondered whether Rabbi Louis Binstock was really busy. And he opened up the Tanakh and said, Sarah Rivka, her name is Sarah Rivka. So I got named on that bima. I'm going to ask Rabbi Rena Singer to join us now. And I just want to tell you, I'm not your mom or dad, but I'm so proud of you. I met you before you were in rabbinical school, and we were all so thrilled, just as people, as in your extended family, but to celebrate the fact that somebody like you would be moved to enter this career and enter this path to help support the Jewish people on their way and our 4,000-year-old tradition. So you've heard a lot of what the other women have said. Share with us, because you've heard things that probably have almost no relevance to your rabbinate. What does that feel like? What does it look like from your vantage point? Thank you for being with us tonight, Rabbi Singer.
Yes, hello. It's so nice to see all of you, and it's such an honor to be included on this panel. And I'll just say, you know that Rabbi Mintz is not my mom and dad because it's very hard to say no to her. So here we are. And I mean, it's incredible to hear all of the stories that you have shared, and heartening in some ways because they're so different than my experience. I was in the first class that was ordained that was entirely women from HUC New York. And I work for a female senior rabbi. I grew up as the daughter of two rabbis. So I've had a lot of incredible influence of women rabbis in my life. And not just in my life, also kind of in the larger media. There are many women rabbis who have been depicted in movies and television shows, not just women rabbis, trans rabbis. And so it's a really different world. And I feel like that's really reflected in the work I'm able to do. I was recently asked to give a sermon about abortion from the Bima as a Shabbat that was recognizing reproductive rights, and fighting to protect women's rights to abortion. And I think that sermon hits differently when there's a young woman giving it than an older male rabbi. No offense to the older male rabbis. But yeah, I've experienced, it's not as though there's no sexism in the world and all of the problems are solved. But the vast majority of my short time as a rabbi has been it's been a very good time to be a woman rabbi.
First of all, why is it a good time to be a woman rabbi? And I'm interested because, what you have in common with my wife and my kids is that you're an RK, you're a rabbi's kid. Growing, you not only have the opportunity now of, you were ordained and you've been a rabbi for less than a year, correct?
About a year and a half.
A year and a half, sorry. Is everybody also like me with COVID time going, wait, have you, maybe you were rabbi for 7 years, but it feels like 14 to you and 2 to us. So forgive me on that one. But as somebody who grew up with 2 parents as rabbis and seeing it from that vantage point of being a kid, it's so fascinating to me. Is there anything from that vantage point, and then going through HUC, which is, you know, all of the women here went through HUC-JIR and became rabbis, that's really surprising to you that you didn't know and you thought you knew from the vantage point of, oh, I know that, I'm an RK. Are there any things that are really surprising to you now that you're in the rabbinate?
Oh, yeah, that's such a good question. I mean, something that came up particularly as a kid of, I got to see the experience as a kid of what it was like to be a female senior rabbi and a male senior rabbi in the 90s and 2000s. And I remember seeing people in the congregation, you know, maybe having just watched my mom lead services, go up to my dad and say like, hello, rabbi. And then, you know, not saying the same thing to my mom, or coming up to her and saying, hey, Beth, you know, how's it going? How are your kids? And so you did see those kind of microaggressions taking place, and kind of understand the importance of calling people rabbi and making sure that people know and don't make assumptions about what it means to look rabbinic. But in terms of surprises, yeah, rabbis work really hard. I don't know. I think I knew that, but now I have to do it. And it's different watching somebody else do it than doing it myself. So, I mean, it's a joy, and it's a very creative and engaging kind of work. But yeah, they want you to be available at all hours. So yeah, and I wonder if more women senior rabbis will kind of change some of those expectations, especially as it seems like the model of being a congregational rabbi is based around having a wife at home who's going to cook for you and raise your children and that kind of thing. And I wonder if, as there are more and more senior female rabbis, if it'll change kind of expectations around working hours and that kind of thing.
Yes. Well, that being said, I'm gonna give you an out, which is it's 10 p.m. and I can't believe you came on and did this with us. It is 11 p.m. for Rabbi Priesand, but I don't want to shove you out, but I know you have a lot of other things to do. If you want to stay with us, we'd love to have you. But we totally understand. Rabbi Priesand, you're not going anywhere till like at least midnight because we're ready here after the Zoom call goes off. But I just thought, like, what an unbelievable array to have from 1972 to 2022, and to see this expanse, because now with Rabbi Singer on, we have the expanse of women generations. And that to me feels so fulfilling. And now that it is, a little bit after 8 o'clock, one of the things that I read from the chat was a question about the Jewish future. And I love that Rabbi Priesand said that one of her top 5 is only worry 10 minutes a day. And I'm thinking, wow, man, I don't know. Like, I don't think I can do that, but I'm going to try tomorrow. I'm going to try to do it as soon as I wake up. Imagine if we could like take our worry time and just put it into the first 10 minutes of the day after our morning meditation. That would be perfect. I'm going to set my day up that way. But we all know, especially as Jews in a world like ours, there's a lot to worry about. The question, though, was, in addition to the anxiety and the worry, and we say goodbye to Rena Singer and thank her so much for being with us. And we want to, of course, I want to just say to Jonathan and Beth Singer, God, you have amazing kids. Seriously, you have such beautiful Menchie kids. And I think if there was like a rabbinic kid council, your kids would be the president, vice president, and treasurer, because you're much more forceful with your kids than other kids. They're very, very good Jewish kids, but they're great role models for other people's kids. And I know them very well from seeing them up close and personal. But the question is, we all worry, we all have anxiety. It doesn't matter. Rabbi Fenves, you have a very unique situation now with your husband, who is a cantor, but also a chaplain. And, Rabbi Cohn, you have, obviously it must be very different being a rabbi in Arizona, politically, many different things. But I'm thinking about the worries, and I think about the anxiety that we have being Jews in America today. What are the opportunities that each one of you sees for the Jewish community. So for women rabbis, but also for the Jewish community from 2022 onward. And, you know, I do want to thank Rabbi Priesand for talking about how important synagogue life is, while simultaneously, and I'll start out with this one, which is, it's not an anxiety or worry, it's a reality that so many Jews are no longer affiliated. So they're unaffiliated with a synagogue, but they're affiliated with startups and with other smaller organizations. And how do we see that as an opportunity to partner and grow the Jewish community and deepen those experiences for the future, so that we are more collaborative and communal and less siloed and feeling like we're in competition for Jews. So I look at that as an opportunity to keep synagogues alive and vibrant, but also to partner with the very creative, and a lot of it is younger people who are getting creative about their Jewish experience. So what are the opportunities that once you leave the anxiety and worry, you have for the Jewish future? So I'm going to start with, because I picked on Rabbi Fenves, I'm going to pick on you. And I think it's because as a rabbi cantor couple, you also have a very unique perspective because of your husband's position as well in the world and where you now live, from one coast to the other.
Yeah, I would just name two big kind of pieces have happened for us in the last year and a half. One is I decided to go back to graduate school, and in May I will officially have a master's of marriage and family therapy. And so I've been spending a lot of time counseling young adults in this community, and that's really given me a different window into the world. And our kids were at Brandeis Day School in San Francisco, and now they're the only Jewish children at West Point Elementary here on Post. So I think just parenting children who at almost 7 and 8 are really aware now of what it means to be a minority in a way they never were before. And just the conversations that come and the choices David and I make around how to talk to them around it. And then being a minority, both politically and Jewishly, just all around on an army post, all those things I think have awakened a lot more empathy and a lot more perspective for me. But none of that changes my deeper instinct that we are more isolated than ever as individual Americans, and more confused about the source of meaning in our lives than ever. And that Jewishness, the richness of Torah, and the kind of deep anchoring of our history, those things are now more necessary than they've ever been. So I think the opportunity is that as people try to figure out how to be present virtually and physically with others, and how to really not just deepen relationships, how to even make relationships that are healthy in their lives, I think our tradition can add so much, really, for everyone. And so I hope that we take that opportunity as teachers and spiritual guides to help people do that.
Thank you. And Mazel Tov on being back at school and getting your master's.
Yeah, see that, Helen, there you go. Rabbi Cohen, right? You can always go back to school and keep doing different things. And I would say with my Central Conference of American Rabbis hat, I think more rabbis will continue to find different ways to rabbi. And that is a different thing. I think one congregational path will no longer be the norm. I think in, a regular, like so many professions, people will rabbi in a lot of different ways over time.
It's great. And I love that you said it's an opportunity. Rabbi Beth, I'm going to have you go next, and then Rabbi Cohen, and then Rabbi Priesand. But before you go, Rabbi Beth, I do want to say, I think it's interesting to reflect on what Rabbi Fenves just said, because in 1997, when I was ordained, you could become a pulpit rabbi. And it's like, if you weren't a part of the placement to become a pulpit rabbi, well, then there was everybody else. It was still, that was 25 years ago, but you were being trained to be a pulpit rabbi. And I'm so glad that you highlighted that, Carla, Rabbi Fenves, because it's so important to know that there's so many other ways to become ordained and then be a rabbi in the world. Rabbi Beth Singer.
Yeah, one of the exciting things about having one of your children become a rabbi is that I've met so many of her classmates and some of the just newly emerging rabbis. And I tell you, we are in some good shape for the future. I feel so excited about this newest generation of leaders like Rena and her classmates, and our cousin Michael Lewis is going to be ordained in, I don't know if any of my family is still on, but he's going to be ordained in May from the LA campus, and he was hired by Temple Emanu-El of Dallas, and he's just, I've known him since he was a little boy, and I don't know if Kristen Wahlberg is still on this call, but her daughter Margot, all of you know Margot from her beautiful singing at the High Holy Days. She and her fiance are both going to rabbinical school this fall. And we know that she is going to, with all of these people, they are really going to be this great future leadership. And I make it a point as part of my rabbinate at Emanu-El to find young people, kids in middle school and high school that I think might be interested. Like a few people said to Carla, you should consider becoming a rabbi. And I have my list and have the coffee dates set up. And I have to say that I have two kids that are not rabbis and would never be rabbis in a million years, but they and their friends are building the Jewish future you don't have to be a rabbi to build the Jewish future. And they're really out there, and they go to late Shabbat with Rabbi Mintz and rave about that. And I think there's great hope for the Jewish future.
Rabbi Cohn.
So I want to pick up on what the other rabbi singer said. She mentioned casually that they were all women in her ordination class. And so I'll tell you my concerns rather than just like, oh, it's going to be great. One concern is that the feminization of the rabbinate, I think, has effects in its effect on congregations. So, for example, in my experience, at least, as a woman leading a congregation, I have a certain style. It's more feminine. It's more collaborative, it's warmer. I often sign my emails, love, Rabbi Helen. And I do that on purpose. And so guess who's attracted to that? The women tend to be more attracted. And we have a significant number of women who are members whose Jewish husbands aren't. They've been damaged by their bar mitzvah experience, or they just can't be bothered or whatever. And so I see this as a kind of might be a problem, actually. So that's one thing. Another concern I have about like Judaism, especially liberal Judaism moving into the future, is that we lean very heavily on tikkun olam, on social action, social justice. And that is probably the most active part of our congregation right now. And that's not a very solid Jewish foundation, actually. I mean, we do what we can to root that in Jewish values. At the same time, we acknowledge that humanists and Christians and Muslims, other people, are also doing the same work. Only we call it tikkun olam, and then we feel good because we're Jews in doing it. But that also is not sustainable, I don't think. So it's not like I have an answer. The one thought that comes to mind is that, we've just finished with Purim, and Purim is an eternal lesson about the rise and fall and rise again of the Jewish people and of peoples in general. I mean, it's a historic dimension, but for us personally, we see that cycle in history, and I don't want to pretend that I know what the upcoming cycle is. I do totally, as Rabbi Fendis says, I totally believe in the endurance of the Jewish people and of Judaism, but I have no idea what it's going to look like.
Thank you, Rabbi Cohn. A lot to think about. And Rabbi Sally Priesand, you're going to give us the last word of hopeful opportunity, because we know you, and we know you only worry 10 minutes a day. So I want to give you the I don't want to say the final word, but I want to, be respectful of the fact that it's 11:18 where you are, and it's only 8:18 for us, but we'd like to hear from you to share that wisdom. And we want to talk about the hope and the opportunity amidst the worry and the anxiety for the Jewish people.
Well, I think it's probably a difficult question to answer because it's different depending on the community in which you live and what the opportunities are. There's not just one answer that's going to be good for everyone. And frankly, I pretty much agree with everything that my colleagues just said around the table. I'm a big believer. Well, I think Tikkun Olam is one way of getting people in because it's also a way of them building relationships with other faith communities. And younger people seem to want very much to do something to make their community better for everyone. So if you bring them in with Tikkun Olam, then there are other things you need to work on. One of them is community. I think one of the things that we lost during the pandemic is that we realized how much we miss community, how much we miss being together. And I think that we've learned a lot during the pandemic about being able to do things a different way. So we have to build on that as well. I agree with Rabbi Singer that I've been just almost blown away by the creativity of our youngest colleagues. They have so much to offer, and I think that our future's in good hands, and that will be something that we'll take great pride in as we watch them build the Jewish community. So I'm not certain that there's really one answer that's going to fit everywhere. In my rabbinate, my philosophy has always been one mitzvah at a time. What that means is that people who try to do everything all at once generally fail. They give up, there's too much. And so in my congregation, I would say, I'm going to do one mitzvah at a time, choose one thing, make it part of your life, then you'll be ready to go on to something else. And on the holy days, I've often said, this is going to be my new mitzvah of the year, something I've not ever regularly done. And I invite all of you to do it with me. There have been many people since my retirement who have told me that one mitzvah at a time philosophy has really helped them. So if you're going to get people in through Tikkun Olam, then you have to teach them about, okay, what makes Judaism different? And one of those things is our ritual. And if you start maybe just with Shabbat, makes a big difference. I know I for a long time now on Friday afternoon, I turn off all my technological devices and I have a very peaceful Shabbat. And I think our ancestors were very wise in creating that kind of a day. So if you just pick one thing that you're going to try to do on Shabbat and make it part of your lifestyle, you may be ready then to go on to the next thing. So one mitzvah at a time, I highly recommend it.
Thank you, Rabbi Priesand. I am going to give Rabbi Beth Singer the very last word in saying goodbye to everybody. But one of the things that I'll share my personal thing in 1 minute, which is when Rabbi Cohn talked about being, the feminine part about being a rabbi. And I think we all worry about, there was a world for thousands of years where only men were rabbis, and moving into a world where only women are cantors and rabbis and Jewish educators also gives young male identified Jews a sense of placelessness or rootlessness. And so I think that we have to do that work. And what I will say also, Rabbi Cohn, is that, whether you sign the word love, one of the impacts of the pandemic on me is for some of us, we were told, you shouldn't say I love you to a congregant. It's a little complicated. And we live in a post-Me Too world where also touching and we've lived through 2 years. And what has happened to me is I am leaving this pandemic looking our congregants in the eyes, and I'm looking at all of you right now and saying, I love you. And I mean it. I love you dearly. You are so meaningful to us. And I hope that all rabbis are able to get to a place where they shower and really express their love and gratitude to the kahila and to their individuals. And the other thing is, I'm so glad to be hugging again. So I also hope that we get to a place where we all feel comfortable hugging men and women. When we think about hinema tovu manayim, about sitting together, it's also about being physically hinenu in each other's presence, being able to hold hands and hug and share the love. So I'm sharing my own feelings of overwhelming love for all of these women who made it possible for me to be here. Rabbi Beth Singer, Rabbi Jonathan, I know Rabbi Jonathan's here in spirit and on the Zoom, your beloved colleagues, and thanks for making this program happen for us tonight.
Thank you. Thank you. Wonderful, wonderful words, Rabbi Mintz. And we love you too. Everyone does. What's a congregational rabbi of any gender without congregants? So we're just really grateful to everyone from our congregation and other congregations who just shared this very great celebration with us tonight. And I'm just going to turn it back to Ariana for our bookends conclusion.
Thank you so much. I think we've seen in the comments here tonight, just the inspiration, the love, the words of wisdom, so many things that I took notes on to improve my life when I wake up tomorrow morning. You all have been an inspiration to me. I think I've made that pretty clear. And I think you've inspired our entire community this evening. Thank you all for sharing yourselves with us. We have wonderful events coming up at the temple, but I'm going to feature these women right now, and you guys can check out our website. And next Friday, all of the female clergy will be leading services. But kol hakavod, yashar koach, toda rabah, everything in between. You are all loved, and you are an inspiration, and we thank you. And everyone, thank you for being here this evening.
Good night, everyone.